There's a small stretch of Arizona highway where the desert doesn't have much to say. The land is flat and unforgiving, the kind of place where people pass through instead of staying. But back in the late 1950s, there was a woman who refused to let that emptiness define her. Her story, and the mysterious stranger who changed everything about it, has been buried in an old desk drawer for over 40 years, until her granddaughter found it. The beginning of this story doesn't start with tragedy, though it gets there eventually. It starts with ambition. After World War II ended and the soldiers came home, Raymond Hartman arrived with something most men didn't have, a clear vision of what he wanted. He'd spent years commanding landing craft in the Pacific, watching the endless ocean, working in salt water and noise and danger. When he finally stood on American soil again, free from all that, what he wanted most was dirt under his feet and a reason to meet people. Not just any people, travelers, the kind of folks who came through with stories and destinations, and the kind of exhaustion that only a kind word and a warm meal can ease. He found a piece of property that nobody else seemed to want. It was alongside Route 66, that legendary ribbon of asphalt that pulled the entire nation westward like gravity. This wasn't the gleaming highway of postcards or the famous stretches everyone talked about. This was the raw middle section, the part that crossed Arizona's desert landscape, where the sun was brutal and the nearest town could be miles away. Most people would have looked at that land and seen failure. Hartman saw potential. What happened next took 4 years of his life. He didn't hire crews or sign contracts with developers. He built it himself. Raymond Hartman, with his wife Della handing him nails and organizing materials, constructed 12 small cabins one at a time. They were whitewashed and simple, nothing fancy, but they were built with attention. He was doing more than constructing structures. He was creating rest stops for weary travelers. He built a diner too, just 6 stools, a grill, and counter space where Della could cook. That kitchen became famous among the truckers who ran that section of highway. Word spread about the place. People started looking for it. The sign they put up was nothing elaborate. It announced Hartman's Motor Court with a smaller neon beneath advertising vacancy. When night fell, that red neon glow was the only light for many miles in either direction. It became a beacon. It meant shelter, it meant a hot meal, it meant someone cared enough to leave the light burning. This is important to understand. Raymond Hartman didn't operate his business on transactions alone. He was the kind of owner who would welcome a family that had broken down at midnight without charging them a single dollar. His coffee went to people who couldn't pay. The truckers who hauled cargo up and down that highway knew his name, and many of them deliberately scheduled their routes around his counter, knowing what they'd find there. He embodied something that's almost impossible to explain to people who've only known economies built on efficiency. He believed that a motor court wasn't just a building, it was a commitment to a stranger. It was a promise that when they arrived, exhausted and uncertain, a light would be burning. For 13 years, he kept that promise. Every night, that sign glowed red against the desert sky. Then came an ordinary Tuesday in winter. Raymond Hartman sat down at the counter of his own diner, the one Della had managed so well for over a decade. The snow had come early that year. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens in the desert when weather has driven everyone indoors. He poured himself coffee and sat on one of the stools he'd built, and his heart simply stopped. He was 61 years old. The cup didn't even get cold before he was gone. Della did what people do when the person they've built their entire life around suddenly vanishes. She made arrangements. She buried him in the local cemetery, in a plot she'd already purchased years before, saving a space beside it for herself someday. And when she returned to the motor court that same night, she did something that mattered enormously. She turned the sign on. It's hard to explain why that action was so significant unless you understand what that sign represented. It wasn't about business. It was about Raymond. It was about the promise he'd made and kept every single night for 13 years. Turning off that neon would have felt like agreeing that he was truly gone, that everything he'd built was already ending. So she turned it on even though her hands moved slower at the grill than his had. Even though the truckers who came for Raymond now came less frequently, even though she was alone. The note, the one the bank had written years ago to help them build everything, was still outstanding. There was still money owed. That winter, as business slowed the way it always did in cold months, she missed some payments. Not all of them, just some. And when she reached out to the bank to explain, to ask for patience, to remind them that she'd been faithful for 13 years, she received a response that revealed how little faithfulness matters to institutions. The bank decided to call the entire note due, not just the missing payments, everything. Every dollar still owed on the property, the cabins, the diner, the land. All of it became due at once. The number was $4,200 for a widow running a slow motel in the desert with empty cabins and griddle money in a coffee can. That might as well have been $400,000. She didn't have it. She didn't have anything close to it. A deputy came with a foreclosure notice and a tack, and he nailed it to the office door while she watched. She had 9 days. It was during those 9 days, with the legal notice visible to every potential guest, that a car pulled into the gravel lot near midday. The man driving it was substantial in size, traveling alone, heading west toward California. He'd been on the road since before sunrise, and he was looking for 2 simple things: coffee and a place to rest for an hour. He saw the cabins. He saw the neon sign dark in the daylight, and he saw the white piece of paper on the office door, the deputy climbing back into his county vehicle, and a woman with gray hair standing very still in the doorway, her hand pressed against the frame. This stranger had a choice. He could read the situation instantly, a place in trouble, a woman in distress, and simply keep driving. There was another diner 11 miles up the road that didn't have a foreclosure notice. No one would fault him. No one would ever know. But the woman straightened her shoulders. She wiped her hands on her apron, and she asked him, with all the stateliness she could manufacture, if he'd like a room or a cup of coffee, because the place was still open. It was still hers. The bank hadn't taken it yet. The man took off his hat and said coffee would be fine. He signed the register the way certain people sign things when they want to avoid attention, not with the name the world knew, but with the simple name his mother had given him decades ago: M.M. Morrison, Cabin 4. He paid for the night, though he had no intention of staying. Della didn't look twice at the signature. She'd poured coffee for 10,000 strangers. She just slid the cup across the counter and went back to wiping an already clean surface, because moving her hands was the only thing keeping her together that morning. After a while, this big man asked her a gentle question. He asked how long she'd owned the place, and everything came out. It poured out of her the way things pour out of people who've been carrying them alone for too long, 13 years. Her husband built it. He died this winter. The bank changed its mind about patience. A gas company wanted the corner for a filling station. 9 days until it wasn't hers anymore. She told him all of it without asking for anything in return, just answering a kind question from a stranger who'd be gone by morning. Then she caught herself and apologized, saying she hadn't meant to burden a passing traveler with her troubles. By afternoon, the oil company representative arrived. This was the man who wanted to turn her motor court into a place to pump gasoline. He walked the property without even removing his hat, measuring with his eyes where the pumps would go. Then he came into the diner and set a folder on the counter. Not unkindly, but not with warmth either, he explained that she should really sign the early buyout offer. It was smart, he said. It was reasonable. She'd get something instead of nothing. The bank would take it all in 9 days anyway. He tapped the folder twice. The woman who had been holding herself together through sheer will felt something collapse inside. She knew he was partially right. There was no good answer. The man in the suit was already certain of how this would end. The big man at the counter set down his coffee cup. "Take your hat off," he said quietly. "You're indoors and there's a lady here." The oil company man turned annoyed. He started to say something about this being a private business matter, but then he got a proper look at the man on the stool. He got a look at his size. He got a look at his face, and his mouth just stopped working the way it stops working when a person does their arithmetic very quickly. He took off his hat. Della's hand froze on the counter. The big man didn't make a speech. He never would. He just looked at the folder and then at the man and said, "Put that away. She's not signing anything today." And he said it, the way a person says things when no response is expected. The oil company man picked up his folder. He put his hat back on outdoors where it belonged. He got in his car and left because some truths don't need explanation. Then the big man asked Della one question, not about her grief, not about her husband, just the name of the bank and the exact figure of the note. "Every dollar," she told him. $4,200. He nodded like someone who'd already decided what something was worth. He finished his coffee. He said, "Good night." He went out to cabin 4, the one he'd paid for without needing. And in the morning, before the griddle was hot, his car was gone. Della thought that was the end of it. A kind stranger who'd told a rude man to mind his manners and then driven on westward like everyone does. She had 8 days left. She lit the sign anyway. But the big man hadn't driven west. He'd driven the opposite direction entirely. He drove to the county seat, and he was waiting when the bank opened. He walked in, and the bank officer recognized him from the pictures on the movie house walls 2 doors down, and he asked one flat question: what would it take to clear the Hartman note? All of it, today. He paid in cash, $4,200, counted onto the marble counter in front of the cage. Every penny, the late charges, every fee the bank had attached. The officer counted it twice because a man doesn't see that much cash cross his counter in a year out there. Then came the formality. Who should be written as having paid this? The big man, who could have had his name on a brass plate in that lobby for the asking, whose face was on a poster in the picture house 2 doors down, looked at the officer level and quiet and said one thing: make it out to a friend. The officer started to protest. He needed a name for the ledger, didn't he? The man just looked at him and said it again, the same way: a friend. So that's what went in the book. That's what got recorded. He signed nothing. He took the stamped note marking it paid in full, the cleared deed to the cabins and the diner and the land, folded them into his coat, and drove back the way he came. Della was at the griddle when his car rolled back into the gravel lot. Surprise flashed across her face. She hadn't expected to see him again. He came inside. He didn't sit down. He took the deed and the stamped note from his coat and laid them on the clean counter in front of her, turning them so she could read them properly. Then he reached into his pocket and placed the key to cabin 4 on top of them. And while she was still trying to understand what she was looking at, he closed her hand over the key, the deed, the cleared note, holding it shut for a moment the way you do when you need something to truly land and be understood. It's yours, he said. All of it paid. Nobody's taking it. She couldn't speak. She looked at the paid in full stamp. She looked at her name on the deed. She looked at the key in her own hand. No sound came. Then she found enough breath to ask the only question that made sense. Who was he? What was his name? Who should she thank? He was already putting his hat on. On his way out the door, he reached up and took the foreclosure notice off the office door, the tack and all, folded it once, and put it in his pocket so she wouldn't have to touch it. Keep the sign lit, he said through the window. Then he drove west the way he'd been going all along. By the time Della got outside with the deed in her hand, he was already a small shape disappearing down Route 66. She never learned his name. Della Hartman kept that sign burning for 19 more years. The cabins filled and emptied with families headed west, with truckers headed east. She cooked eggs. She poured coffee. She made the place thrive. The note was gone. The corner was hers. No filling station was ever built. She died in 1978, the same year they completed the interstate that siphoned traffic away from Route 66 and let the little towns go quiet. The motor court passed to her son, who eventually let it sit while the desert reclaimed the cabins, one piece of wood at a time. By 2003, the property was barely recognizable. But Della's granddaughter came back with a truck full of paint and a determination to restore it. Route 66 had become trendy again. People drove it deliberately now, looking for authentic pieces of the past. A hand-built motor court with the original neon sign was exactly what they wanted. While clearing out the old office, the granddaughter opened the bottom drawer of a desk her grandfather had constructed. Inside, she found a yellowed banknote from 1959 with paid in full stamped across it. The line showing who had paid it read only 2 words, written in the clerk's careful handwriting: a friend. Beneath the note sat the old register from the motor court. Its pages were swollen from damp, but when she turned to autumn 1959 to the week the note was paid, she found it. A single line in a plain, steady hand: M. Morrison, Cabin 4. One night below that, in her grandmother's handwriting added sometime much later, were words that changed everything. Marion Robert Morrison, he had signed his real name. It wasn't until years later that Della had finally recognized the face she'd seen on TV, had heard the name spoken aloud, and had understood who the stranger was. By then, decades had passed. She'd lived an entire lifetime lit by a sign a man had asked her to keep burning. And all that time, she'd never known exactly who he was, even after she found out. He paid off a stranger's entire obligation in cash. He told a bank officer to record it under a friend. He drove away before sunrise. He never mentioned it to anyone. There's no newspaper article, no press release, no plaque anywhere in that county bearing his name. He paid $40,000 in today's money, by some calculations even more, to save a woman's livelihood and never took credit for it. The having done it was the entire point. The being known for it would have spoiled it completely. The granddaughter stood in that office for a long time, holding the old note in one hand and the register in the other. She thought about her grandmother lighting that sign every single night for 19 years, after a stranger told her to keep it lit, after a stranger whose name she didn't learn until she was old. Then she finished the paint job, she restored the neon. And on the night she switched Hartman's motor court back on, the red light was once again the only thing for 11 miles in either direction on that old highway. The way Raymond built it to be, the way a friend paid to keep it. There's something about that story that stays with you. It's not just about the money, though the gesture was extraordinary. It's about what it meant that he did it in complete silence. It's about the fact that he was already wealthy, already famous, already the subject of endless attention and speculation. And yet he chose to create something that no one would ever know about, something he'd take to his grave. He lived another 20 years after that day in Arizona. He made more movies. He became an icon. He had photographs taken and interviews conducted and tributes paid. And not once in any of those conversations did he mention Dela Hartman or the motor court or the note he'd paid. Not once. It makes you wonder how many stories like this exist. How many dead motel registers are sitting in drawers across America? How many bank ledgers have a friend written in the payment line? How many promises did he keep that the world never learned about? This is what separates genuine kindness from the performance of kindness. Genuine kindness doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need acknowledgement. It just needs to be done. And if this story somehow reached you, if these words found their way to your screen, then maybe you could do something with it. Share it. Pass it on to someone who's struggling to hold on to something they built. Tell it to someone who feels like the world is taking everything from them. Tell it to anyone who needs to know that strangers with good hearts still exist. Tell it to anyone who's ever kept a light burning when everything around them was going dark. Because that's the real legacy of this story. It's not about who saved who, it's about what it looks like when someone decides that a stranger's dignity matters more than staying silent. What it looks like when someone uses their position not to be seen, but to do good in a way that can never be traced back to them. The sign at Hartman's motor court is lit again now, and somewhere, if there's any justice in how the universe works, maybe Dela Hartman knows. Maybe she sees that light burning and knows that her granddaughter finished what Raymond started, and what a stranger in cabin 4 protected. Keep that sign lit, he said. And she did, for 19 years. And then her granddaughter did. And maybe now, someone reading this will keep it lit too. Not the neon on Route 66, but the idea of it. The idea that kindness still matters. That promises are still worth keeping. That strangers are worth seeing, worth helping, worth saving. That's the story. That's the whole thing.